make a killing of evil. Who's gonna know?
Two of your fellow students, Rod Harper and Stacy Twelfman, were murdered last night at the Falls by a person or persons unknown in a cold-blooded fashion. The reason I came here was to ask you, as friends and good citizens, to come forward to me or my staff with any information you might have concerning this terrible crime.
Perhaps some of you feel guilty that you weren't nicer to Rod and Stacy while they were alive.
Once, in the 8th grade, I had a fight with Rod, and I told him to fuck off and die.
I'd like to offer the killer's ass some support in the fucking electric chair.
I would like to know whether this killer removed any body parts or sexually defiled any orifice of either victim.
You're tragically sick.
I want to know, because if he didn't, I'm starting to think this loser deserves a thumbs down.
Hi, Annette. It's Laura Lee Sherman.
Annette DeWald was, in fact, a virgin at the time of death.
Are you two kissing?
Of course. I'm not a child anymore, Dad.
Have you gone further than that? Can you go further?
Yes.
The last 2 days, we have lost 3 of our children. We have now established a common link between those killings. All 3 victims attended our public high school, and all 3 victims appeared to be virgins.
Holy Hyman's Batman, they're killing virgins.
Well, what are we supposed to tell our kids? To go out and get laid if they want to feel safe?
So what better to deprive them of the only innocence they have left? Their precious, virginal children.
This is Kurt Rector from House of Death, and you're listening to The Hysteria Continues.
And indeed you are. Welcome back to The Hysteria Continues, and this time we're back to the year 2000, the millennium, and Cherry Falls, the controversial, much maligned and little seen at the time, slasher flick from Jeffrey Wright, the Australian director who gave the world Romper Stomper and shot Russell Crowe to superstardom. This is going to be a fun one to talk about. I guess we haven't done that many. I'm trying to think. We've done all the Scream series and I Know What You Did Last Summer series, but of course there were lots of slasher movies that came out post-Scream, and this was kind of one of the last wave. And it's got an interesting backstory, so it'll be interesting to get back to that. Welcome back to Hysteria Continues. Glad you've joined us for this trip down memory lane to the killer who targets virgins for a change. So, how are we all doing? Nathan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. It's pretty early, but I was well rested last night, so...
Excellent. When you mean well rested, do you mean you carried on a cloud of smoke to your bed?
That's what helped me be well rested.
Well, that's good. Well, I'm on a health kick at the moment. I've not been drinking for the last week and a half. So, what if I just had cups of tea, and that's been about it. So, having a little health kick for 2 weeks. So, Erik, how about you?
Yes, I'm not on a health... Well, I am on a health kickish. I've got a lovely glass of water beside me. Taste sensation. Ooh. But I Cherry Falls really is very close to the bone for me because as a virgin, I feel like I'm a prime victim material for the killer. So it's quite terrifying. I know that for you, Justin, as a complete trollop, you'd be safe, but nice people like me, it's quite scary.
I couldn't say I'm a virgin, Erik, but I am a comedy virgin because I've never laughed at one of your jokes.
You're so rude.
Thank you. And talking of people laughing at things, Nathan, are you bathing in the glory of your next week's pick?
Oh, yes. I can't wait to discuss it.
Well, if you don't know, we won't spoil it yet, but if you are a member of the Facebook group, you will know what we're discussing next time. It's a Nathan pick, and the outpouring of love for this movie has been quite touching, hasn't it?
Yeah.
So, but we'll come on to that later. Joseph, how about you?
Hyman. Buster Hyman.
Buster Hyman.
Kind of like my James Bond code name for the episode, so you shall forever refer to me, at least till the end of the episode, as Buster.
Okay. Right.
Don't refer to me as Buster. I'm just kidding.
Okay. Anyway, before we get started, we just wanted to give we just wanted to mention that we lost a very special and dear friend to the podcast, Johnny Krug, in the last couple of weeks. Just wanted to say a few words to say how sorry we were to lose him at such a young age. And of course, if you've listened to the podcast over the years, you'll know that Johnny, in fact, I believe, Joseph, wasn't he the very first guest on the podcast?
Well, guest host, yes, he was the very first guest host. It was on the episode 60. It was Predator. Johnny was one of my best friends. I'm going to miss him like crazy. We did Ninja Terminators together, and before he passed, we had planned to take over Short Bus Cinema. Obviously, that's fallen through now, but listen to the end of the episode. We'll have some best of clips of Johnny.
And of course, he joined us on our commentary track for Madman, wasn't it?
That's correct.
Yeah. Well, he will be missed, and so his work is still online. So his work on Short Bus Cinema, and what was his other one? The Kruger Nation podcast, wasn't it?
The Kruger Nation. As far as I know, I don't think his old shows are online. You could probably find them through some sort of archive. That was another one he was planning on bringing back.
He has some old videos under Kruger Nation on YouTube.
Yeah,
it's good quality stuff. I liked it. I watched a few videos.
Yeah, well, listen to the end of the show for our tribute to our great friend Johnny, and we will miss you. And I wish I could say there were titties in this film we're going to cover, but that's part of the censorship cover-up, as we'll be finding out later. But
I forgot that was his classic catchphrase. Yes,
titties.
No worries, I got it for the next episode.
Yeah, we'll be thinking of Johnny for the next episode. But this one, anyway, we'll talk about it in context. But yes, I do listen up to the end of the show for our tribute to Johnny.
And Johnny, I'm retiring riff tracks just for you. I'll never watch another riff tracks.
Why is that?
Because Johnny was a huge. We were huge fans of riff tracks, and we'd download them and send them to one another. And I don't know. I just don't think I could watch them anymore.
Oh.
Well, as I say, listen to the end of the show for a special tribute to Johnny. Well, let's talk about what we've been watching recently. I know there's something that a few of us have watched. I know, Joseph, do you want to tell us what you've been watching?
Well, yeah, the only thing I've watched was Fear Street, 1994. When I think of like young adult novels, I always like flowed towards Christopher Pike or Diane Ho, so I was not entirely familiar with R.L. Stine's Fear Street stuff growing up, or when they came out. So I don't know if this is like an adaptation of our an established story. Do you guys know? I
don't think, as far as I know. I mean, I've never read any. We were talking about this before we came on air, that even myself or Erik kind of knew them. And my understanding was Goosebumps was for like a younger audience, and Fear Street was slightly older, well, it's still young teenage audience. But my understanding is that this version has been kind of gored up or adulted up, I'm going to guess. So I read a very quick interview with the author, and he sort of said that it's the kind of stuff you wouldn't have seen in his books. So it was for more of a young adult audience. So Netflix have kind of done a more kind of extreme version, I guess, of his books.
Yeah. So, but basically, this is not like a story that's already been featured in a R.L. Stine book. It's like a completely new story, right?
Nathan,
as far as I know, it is. I haven't seen the movie yet. I'm going to watch it tonight because I actually talked to Wes into it. He's going to watch it with me.
Okay.
Yeah. But I don't think it is because I've read all the Fear Street books, and no, I think it's a standalone.
Okay. Yeah, because, I mean, either way, I'm not the person to review Fear Street 1994 if it's based off R.L. Stine stuff, because I don't really necessarily know. But taking the movie under its own context, this was my Godzilla King of the Monsters, Erik. This movie is so loud and nonstop, and it's all this, like, teen angst, and it's at this irritating pitch. And it's more often than not, it's punctuated with music that's on this like constant ascension. Whether that was a stylistic choice or just a bad mix, who knows? But it's especially irritating when you don't really care about the characters or their problems, that you're also hit with, shrieking noise to get you involved with the film. I mean, I just didn't care about these kids, the story, and I especially didn't think Fear Street 1994 looked like the year 1994. In any way whatsoever, outside of a random song on the soundtrack. for me, the movie is entirely too long. It's 107 minutes. It's muddled and confused. I just couldn't follow the story. I mean, I was nodding off like more often than not, and when it landed on that kind of Back to the Future style closing, I literally sat up in my recliner and screamed at the TV, "No fucking thank you." To be fair, though, 1994 is shot. It's wonderfully shot, and it features some really great scenes. I especially got a huge laugh over the fact that there seems to be no parental supervision in this town whatsoever. There's this one scene that's shot like Mad Max Fury Road on a school bus, with the students opening this emergency exit to dump Gatorade on a car that's following them. It's so chaotic and in your face, and the bus is literally like careening down this back road at inhuman speeds. And I'm sitting there laughing, thinking, where are the goddamn teachers when this is going on? The slasher scenes I think they're kind of too few and far in between for me. They're pretty darn good, what we get of them, but I think they belong in a more coherent production, if I'm honest, especially that opening set in the mall. I really love that opening scene. When I watched that first 15 minutes, I was like, wow, this is going to be something good. But, ultimately, I think I wanted more of a straight ahead slasher, and this is kind of it feels like they're world building, and I'm just not interested in these people enough to get involved with their world, if I'm honest. I don't really know what this was, really, but it wasn't for me.
Okay, well, Erik, what are your thoughts on Fear 1994?
Okay, well, I agree with Joseph that it didn't feel like 1994. I mean, there is a computer with a big CRT monitor that looks like it's from 1994, but there's a guy there who's on instant chat all the time, and the speeds they are typing and responding at seem to indicate that it's not dial-up he's using. So that definitely was not 1994. The soundtrack, yeah, it's all 90 songs, but they kind of still feel contemporary to me, so it didn't feel like it was set 27 years ago. But I wasn't crazy about the opening scene, which mimics the opening of Scream very closely. But I was kind of won over by the more supernatural elements that come into the plot sort of, after that. And I do agree with Joseph, that scene with the school bus where they're opening the emergency exit at the back. It's like, why are they allowed to do that? Is there not, would the driver not stop the bus and go, hey, you're not meant to be opening the emergency exit? It's all very...
I kept waiting for Miss Crabtree from South Park to be like, be quiet back there. It's like there's no teachers on this bus whatsoever.
Yeah. But then there's a great sequence set in a supermarket where the kids break into later in the film that I really enjoyed, and the film sort of won me over at that point, and I'm really intrigued now to see where the series goes. What I loved about it a lot as well was they didn't go down the route of making this a 10-part series of 45-minute episodes, because that would have just bored me to tears. I think the 107 minutes, whilst it is slightly excessive, I think it's much preferable to watching 8 hours of a series that just treads water for 7 of those hours. Overall, its slasher elements are kind of they're slight, I suppose. It doesn't feel like a slasher movie after it's maybe the opening 20 minutes or so, but I really enjoyed it, and I did welcome the fact that it introduced a supernatural element to it that sort of negates the slasher element to a degree, but I didn't mind that. So yeah, I'm intrigued to see where they go. I mean, yeah, it's left on a cliffhanger, but the sequel is set in 1978, is it? So I don't know how they
camp, I believe.
Yeah, so I don't know how they resolved the 1994 loose ends in well, I don't know. We'll wait and see. It's available next Friday, isn't it?
I think so.
Given that Nathan hasn't seen it, so no spoilers, apart from obviously there are going to be 2 other films, one set in 1978, one set in 1666. And so I think it looks like they'll be flashing back to this kind of, it's going to be a camp massacre in 1978. So obviously riffing off Sleepaway Camp and all of those kind of 80s sort of camp slashers for Friday the 13th. Ironically, it's set in 1978, which is the year Halloween came out. And I thought it was kind of strange. 1994 was a kind of an odd time to set it, in so much that as far as slasher movies, it was like 2 years before Scream. So the slasher movie is pretty much dead by that point. I don't know why they said it in 94. I don't know what what the touch point was, what the I mean, I liked it. I mean, I found it, obviously it's something Netflix of, I did read somewhere this wasn't a Netflix production, it was a pickup, but it was obviously made to kind of cash in on kind of Stranger Things style mania.
Yeah, it has that vibe, yeah. And it.
Which is fun in a lot of ways. And I appreciate things like they had like, the cast was very diverse, both, ethnically and in sexuality as well. So that was quite sort of interesting. But I agree with Joseph that an hour and 47 minutes is too long for like a teen slasher movie, even one that's kind of world building. It just kind of it needs to be a snappy 80 or 90 minutes. And I think they could have quite easily cut out a couple of bits of it. And it only grinds to a halt every 20 minutes or so for like some kind of soul searching kind of teen angst style kind of sort of thing, and a kind of romance plot, which kind of does it kind of in some ways in a film like The Final Girls, it works really well. You remember that film from 7 or 8 years ago now, which had a real heart, whereas it was trying for that. And I'm not entirely sure it was it's totally successful. Having said that, some of the set pieces were great. I think some of the killers, especially the Skullface killer who you see at the beginning, is a really good horror movie slasher villain look. And the scene in the supermarket I thought was really well done, especially some of the gore, the deaths, which kind of reminded me a bit of some of the deaths in Intruder, which I presume wasn't accidental. So yeah, I'm looking forward to the 1978 one, but it looks like they'll be doing it in the context of the same characters, but flashing back with some. I'm not sure quite how they'll do it, but be interesting to see what Nathan thinks when he gets to see it.
I think when 1978 comes out, I'll wait to hear what you guys think before I try that one. But I don't know. I didn't like the supernatural elements. I wanted, the trailer I saw just made this look like an out-and-out slasher film, and it's not really. I mean, it has a lot going for it in that department, but it's just not a slasher, if you ask me.
It reminded me of a non-quirky version of It Follows, is what it resembled a lot to me. Yeah, sort of. Yeah.
I mean, it's got I think it's Stranger Things. It's almost like Stranger Things and Riverdale had a baby. It's that kind of vibe, I think. But then it's probably not made for
47-year-old men. Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see where they go. And it's great they're still making slasher movies, and they're still still finding fresh ways to do stuff with the subgenre. So I'm all there for that. So kudos to them for doing it. So okay, well, it'll be interesting, Nathan, to see what you think of Fear Street in 1994. But
I think Nathan will like it a lot more than any of us,
especially since I've read all the books. So I kind of have really been looking forward to seeing a Fear Street movie.
Yeah, they do some kind of gentle ribbing again about the books as well. The opening sequence is a teenager working in a bookstore who's selling his books to some very disgruntled customers.
One of my main issues is that for a 1994 film, there were no shoe racks to be seen.
There wasn't a shoe rack to be seen anywhere.
I know,
but they're more 1997, I think, are they, Nathan?
Don't know.
When was Old Federal Massacre made?
Oh, because I was thinking like the shoe rack made its first appearance in 1995, I think. Old Federal Massacre is 96 or 97.
Yeah, so it probably would have been a blooper for them to put a shoe rack into a 1994 set film.
You're the director, Nathan. You don't know this stuff? What's the matter with you?
Partaking.
Well, let's move on to Joseph. Is there anything else you've seen?
No, that's it for this week.
Okay. How about you, Nathan?
I unfortunately don't have any recently seen. The only thing I've watched is the movie that we're covering.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you've watched that. That's a good start.
Yeah,
so.
It's good preparation to watch it before we actually talk about it.
I find that as well, because I tried a few times not watching the film beforehand and it didn't really work.
Yeah,
did you?
It just did.
Which ones, Erik?
I'm joking.
Okay. Well, anyway, Nathan, we'll come on to your thoughts on Cherry Falls in a little bit. But Erik, how about you?
Okay, I only saw one other thing related to horror. It was a film I'd never heard of before called Death of Me, and it was on streaming here on Now TV on Sky Cinema. This is directed by Darren Lynn Bousman, who did a couple of the Saw sequels, And it stars Maggie Q and Luke Hemsworth, who are on holidays on a remote island in Thailand, and they wake up from a boozy night out with no memory of the previous 12 hours. They find a 2-hour video on their camera that seems to show that they took some bizarre alcoholic shot with hallucinogenic properties that makes them go off and do crazy things. And it culminates in a scene where Luke Hemsworth appears to murder Maggie Q, although obviously she's not dead because she's sitting there watching this video. So what happens is that this film is one of those Jacob's Ladder type films where it's hallucinations within hallucinations within hallucinations, where Maggie Q will have some encounter with something horrific, like a group of zombie-like people who have their eyes and mouths sewn shut, and then suddenly she'll wake up on a couch or on a beach, and apparently it's all a dream or a hallucination. We don't know what to believe, and it keeps going like that, and it doesn't really look like it's going anywhere. I mean, things are kind of explained in the finale, but I was still left with a lot of questions. I mean, it's not a bad film. It's very atmospheric, and there is a kind of a sense of dread to it. But sometimes these Jacob's Ladder type films, where we're thrust into a sort of a chaotic, hallucinating mind, they just end up not adding up to much and just being confusing. I think it would have been nicer if things had wrapped up more neatly. Well, it does wrap them up neatly, I suppose, but the payoff doesn't justify the sort of confusion you feel for the previous 75 minutes or 80 minutes, whatever it was. It's not a bad film at all, and I think it was destined for cinemas until the pandemic struck, so it went straight to streaming services then. But would I recommend, if it's drifting past your eyeballs and maybe pay attention to it? Otherwise, it's not one to seek out, I wouldn't say.
Okay, another quote for the eventual Blu-ray cover.
Yeah.
So, excellent. Anything else?
No, that was it.
Okay. I've not seen. I've been watching mostly kind of TV shows at the moment. I haven't seen any films apart from the one, say, we're covering today. The things of interest, perhaps, would be I caught all of the second season of Black Summer, which is Netflix kind of zombie series. Which I kind of really enjoyed. I mean, it's quite different from the first one. If you have seen the first one, if you haven't seen it, it's kind of set in the early days of zombie apocalypse, but it's done in very much a kind of interesting way of storytelling. And so much everything is all done in these kind of little kind of story bites from different character points of view. And jumps around in time, so you see things happening from different characters' points of view and in different at different points. So sometimes the beginning of the episode might be what happened at the end and vice versa, and you'll see one character seeing something unfolding in a certain way. And they kind of carry that on in series 2. In series 2, it's kind of, 6 months or 9 months after the events in the first one, and they've been quite clever in so much. What they've done is that the first one they seem to spend quite a lot of money on, whereas the sequel, the series 2, is basically people fighting over kind of airdrops of food in a kind of like snowy wasteland. And so what you have is lots of people being chased by zombies across snow. But it also means that you don't have lots of big sets necessarily. But it's more of the same, but it's pretty well done. I mean, it's not groundbreaking, but it's certainly probably better than the last few series of The Walking Dead, put it that way. So, but I take it none of you, I know I'm probably the lone voice who can still kind of holding a bit of a flame for the zombie genre, but I don't think any of you have any of you seen Black Summer?
I'm so out of the loop, Justin, that I've never even heard of Black.
Yeah, neither have I.
Summer. I just had a look on Netflix and I see it there listed, but I've just never heard of it.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, it was successful enough to get a second series, but they obviously managed to keep the budget down. It looks great. And it's just kind of it's far more, in a lot of ways, a lot more cynical than the Walking Dead, because basically even 6 months after the society breaks down, basically everyone's out to get whatever they can and kill it. Nobody cares about anyone else, and they're all out to try and survive by killing everyone else.
Sounds cheery.
Yeah, it's a feel-good hit of the summer. So
it's the ideal zombie series for goths, it sounds like, but for more cheery people like myself, Joseph, and Nathan, it probably wouldn't do much.
Well, what would you rather? What kind of zombie film would you like? Would you kind of
one where they're all in leg warmers and they sometimes have a little breakdance party before they go out and kill people?
Do you think it's a shame we never saw in City of the Walking Dead when the zombies or the infected broke into the dance studio and did all the biting of the lady dancers and leg warmers? Because they didn't become zombies, and then your dream would have come true, wouldn't it?
That would have been my dream come true. It's so right, yeah. Or if zombies had infected the film Perfect with John Travolta and Jamie Lee Curtis. Can you imagine a zombie version? Yeah.
I was going to say, zombies in films, they typically wear a lot of flannel, and it just gets boring to look at. I want to see some thigh-high leg warmers, some headbands. I think that would be awesome, like an 80s slasher set, or an 80s zombie film set in like a aerobic studio. Oh man, yeah.
There's a gap in the market.
There is a gap in the market, but I think we've either drawn attention to, or maybe I've mentioned it before, or someone else, it's probably not my thoughts, but in The Walking Dead, all the zombies, all the women are all wearing ankle-length skirts, which is very dowdy. And I think that's more to do with the fact that it kind of make you have to do less makeup if you cover up the bodies with very long skirts. But I haven't seen any zombies in The Walking Dead in leg warmers, I must admit.
Or bikinis, no.
Or bikinis, for that matter, no. So, okay, well, that's our recently seen. So let's get over to the main feature.
A serial killer is stalking the peaceful town of Cherry Falls. At first, it seems that he is just targeting teenagers, but after the third killing, it becomes clear that all the victims have been virgins. When the town's students hear about this, they realize that there's only one way to protect themselves, and they begin planning a Pop Your Cherry, quote-unquote, party, where they will all lose their virginities together. Meanwhile, Jody, played by the late Brittany Murphy, our virtuous daughter of the town's sheriff, decides to take matters into her own hands and trap the killer herself. This chiller is directed by Jeffrey Wright of Romper Stomper fame and co-stars Jay Moore, Gabriel Mann, and Candy Clark, along with Michael Biehn as the town sheriff. So, I believe this was the first time I had seen Cherry Falls since it debuted on the USA Network all those years ago. I walked away from that viewing with a real empty feeling, like we'd been fed a good movie that was sanitized beforehand of all the properties that made it a good movie. Stuff I'm sure we'll cover in the background when we get to it, but suffice it to say, this time around, I really enjoyed Cherry Falls much more than I had anticipated. Let's start with that brilliant premise, which I think, while not as fully realized as it could have been, is still punctuated with, some clever dialogue and some really rousing chase scenes. And I mean, I especially loved the close call with Brittany Murphy and the killer in the school. And I love the scene where she's trapped in, I guess it's some sort of lab, and she's throwing everything she has at the killer. And she cuts this string that's holding up this big, I guess it's like a big clay shark, and it swings down and just knocks him across the room. I love that scene. But what stuck out this time around and gave the film this really unique feel is that the cast of teen characters actually felt like teenagers, to the point that you can almost smell the Stridex and you can hear their loins crackling.
Ew!
And it's just kind of, it's kind of disturbing is what I'm about to say. It lends the film this real uncomfortable air not seen in many slasher films, with obvious adults playing teenagers. And I'm sure most of these actors were probably in their late or early 20s when they did this, so that's probably why they look so young. But I believe one of my issues at the time of its release was that it felt tame in the blood department, and I suppose it does. But this time around, I felt the subtext was strong, and the narrative was very engaging, to the point that I didn't really care about a few missing drops of blood. I mean, don't get me wrong, I would love to see, anything extra that may exist in some dusty vault somewhere, but I think Cherry Falls works just fine with the blood that it has. I thought Michael Biehn as the sheriff, he was a really well-realized character. He's sympathetic despite, some of his past misdeeds, and that moment of acceptance on his part of this, basically this horrific incident that kind of sets the story in motion. And it's come back to haunt the small town. I thought that scene was well acted from Biehn. It's a very good performance. Overall, I think Cherry Falls, while it's far from perfect, it's a heavier slasher concept than most, and it has a touchy subject matter that I think it tackles it with the right questions and the right amount of trepidation when needed. and then the right amount of brute force when it calls for it. That orgy scene is kind of wow, it's something. I think the jokes mostly land too, and they feel offbeat to the point that they never really feel especially cruel. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed Cherry Falls this time around, and I feel it deserves a second chance at life. It's unusual. It doesn't really play by the rules, and despite a neon sign hanging over the killer and a finale that I think feels a little rushed, it's pretty damn good overall. So Erik, what did you think of Cherry Falls?
Well, like yourself, this was my first time seeing it since 2001, I reckon, when it came out on DVD over here. And like you, was walking away from it back 20 years ago, I had that hollow feeling as if I'd watched something that was empty and hollow, and I enjoyed it a lot more this time around. I can still see why I had reservations about it back in 2001, though. I think the first half of the film has this odd Wes Anderson feel to it. It's populated with quirky characters who just seem a bit out of place in a teen slasher, and they seem like they belong more in a quirky semi-art house effort. There's a lot of humor in it that doesn't land for me personally, and it just doesn't quite hold together well. I think a perfect example of what I'm talking about in terms of its quirkiness is there's a scene where Michael Bihn's sheriff character is teaching his daughter some self-defense moves, and they end up collapsing on top of one another in this kind of awkward semi-sexual manner, and they give each other this look, and I've no idea what that punchline to the scene has to do with anything. It's just a quirk for quirk's sake, and that was kind of nagging at me, that sort of quirkiness the film had. But when it stops that and when it tries to be a slasher film, I thought it was very entertaining. I mean, like yourself, I thought the scene in the school was really well done. I liked the look of the villain as well, and it has so many typical slasher movie elements that I wish it had stuck to the blueprint of the slasher a bit more for its entire running time. I like the fact that there's a misdemeanor that is the setup to the movie, a misdemeanor from the past. And the chase scenes when they come are really, really good. I didn't find the finale to be too rushed. I thought it was quite well done, and it's at that point where we end up in the basement of a certain person's house that the film sort of clicks really into I Know What You Did Last Summer and urban legend territory, and that's when I started to really enjoy the film fully. But my overall feeling is that there's a lot of characters in the film for that first half who have minimal screen time, and I think they would have been better off maybe focusing on perhaps maybe 5 or 6 characters, like kind of what I Know What You Did Last Summer and Urban Legend did, rather than have these sort of dozen peripheral characters whose plot lines really don't go anywhere. I do think the premise is kind of inventive. The fact that you have to be a not virgin. That's my perfect grammar. You have to be a slag really to survive from the killer. It kind of reminded me of the premise that I can't remember. What's that Irish monster movie where you need to repel the monsters by drinking alcohol?
Grabbers,
that's it. So it reminded me of the fun premise to that. But like you said, it doesn't really live up to the premise. It kind of reminded me of Jason Takes Manhattan in that the Manhattan taking is kind of minimal in the film. But overall, it was a lot better than I remembered it. And I appreciate that they were trying to bring something fresh to the table, and that's probably why they were going for that kind of quirky humor. It doesn't quite work for me, but I appreciate again that they were trying to differentiate themselves from other sort of Scream knockoffs. But personally, I would have preferred if they had just been another Scream knockoff, and I think it would have worked better for me, But overall, I thought it was pretty decent, yeah.
Okay. Nathan, your thoughts on Cherry Falls, please?
Oh no, I love Cherry Falls. I think it's excellent movie. Brittany Murphy is fantastic as the final girl. The chase scene in the school is one of my favorite chase scenes. I think it holds up well compared to basically any slasher chase scene. I just thought it was so good. And who uses a shark to repel the killer?
Brittany Murphy does.
I know, and I think that is amazing. I haven't seen a shark used as a weapon like that. So that was really cool. No, I liked all the characters. I love the idea of course, if you've had sex, you're going to survive, which is, obviously a little different. The party scene at the end, I loved the killer just going crazy. There's a great shot where the killer is leaving their house and they're just screaming like in a rage. And it's just so entertaining. It's a lot of fun to watch. It's such a fast-paced movie for me. I would love to see an uncut version. I know there's some uncut gore somewhere. I would love to see that. But as it stands, I think it's a really fun movie. I'm 2 thumbs up on it. I think it's fantastic.
Okay, and our resident virgin, Justin.
Hardly.
Are you saying you're a slut?
He is a slush. Slush.
Well, I was going to say I'm probably the lone person who saw this in the cinema because I saw it when it came out in the UK towards the tail end of summer of 2000. Because without getting into background, but it got released pretty much cinematically to theaters everywhere apart from the US, ironically. So I can remember enjoying it when I saw it on the big screen. I was aware enough by that point. Obviously, the internet had become a thing, and we talked before about sort of seeing all the spoilers and discussion for what was going to script for Scream 2 and all these kind of things. So this was a few years after that. So I was kind of aware that the film had been cut. And my understanding was it had been cut quite heavily and then given a UK release rather than being cut by the British censors. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I remember enjoying it at the time. And I think I remember reading about it in Fangoria at the time as well. I think it's kind of, it's a film for me that is not perfect. I think they were kind of looking at this time, they were kind of looking for a way to kind of not outdo Scream, but like it was almost you couldn't do a straight slasher movie, even though ironically I Know What You Did Last Summer was essentially a straight slasher movie in the wake of Scream. I think the thing I find really interesting about it, I mean obviously the killing the virgins is it's kind of its hook, but it's this whole kind of hypocrisy of small town life that you've got all these adults who are so aghast at the idea of their children, the teenagers losing virginity, but in fact all of the adults in the film seem to have problems of their own, whether or not it's they're drunk or they've got the sins of the father or this kind of thing. And for me, I think the film wouldn't work as well as it does without Brittany Murphy's kind of innocent at the centre of it. I think she's really good because all of the other, and it's quite typical of slash movies from this time, is that all of the wisecracking kind of teenagers don't really take anything seriously, including the death of all the people around them. They just kind of brush it off until the end of the movie. So you basically have all these kind of wisecracks about people or their fellow classmates have died. There's no kind of real gravitas or whatever, or kind of real human emotion attached to any of it. It's just another opportunity to make a joke or to look cool or just to be, this film's probably got the most jaded teenagers of kind of any slasher movie. So without Brittany Murphy, who's so likable and so, this kind of innocent, but also able to defend herself, and she's kind of she has a kind of like a complexity to her as a kind of final girl that I think is missing from a lot of films where you either have someone who, a final girl who becomes this kind of uber final girl, like a Heaven Luncheon Camp or something, although she's great in Nightmare on Elm Street, don't get me wrong. But she has these goes through these gamuts of emotions from being very vulnerable to being kick-ass to, to being Scream Queen to all these different things. And it works really well in the context of the movie. So, I mean, overall, I think it's, I like the fact that it's kind of like another one of those kind of fish out of water type films with a foreign director, in this case an Australian one, taking a look at a small town Americana and the kind of the rot underneath behind the white picket fences, and it kind of works. I mean, I agree with Nathan. I think if the if the film had an uncut release, and from what I've read, is one of the death scenes was completely redone because it was too graphic, and also the end of the movie with the orgy scene was a lot more graphic and a lot more nudity, which was obviously cut out for, I presume, back then. I mean, I don't know if when it was put on USA Network, I don't know if you could have nudity on cable TV at that point, but yeah, it's a shame, given it's a film from only 21 years ago, that the elements don't appear to have survived of the original cut, which is bizarre. But yeah, overall, I like it. I think, like Erik, I think sometimes the humour works a lot, but not all the time. But I think the real saving grace, Michael Biehn is the sheriff and Brittany Murphy. Although I do agree, Erik, that whole weird incestuous thing between the two of them, it doesn't seem to go anywhere. And in fact, actually, it in some ways diminishes this whole idea that he was not an innocent party in the incident that caused the whole thing to kick off in the first place, but certainly was an unwilling participant. It feels a weird. It doesn't feel totally thought through, but I just wonder if it was more to do with this kind of idea of like the rot behind the white picket fence, that everyone is trying to pretend that they're well-meaning and high-standing members of society, but they will have secrets to hide. I don't know exactly, but yeah, overall, I think it's a pretty good movie, and certainly better than some of the other movies that came out around that time.
It felt to me like this was like if The Cure made The Graduate with a slasher movie killer inside of it, because everyone's kind of mopey and kind of dark about everything that's going on, as you should be if there's a slasher movie killer. But it just felt like a bunch of lamentable teenagers stuck in a Dustin Hoffman movie, and because everyone was always kind of like being sexualized around each other, like the scene where Candy Clark asked for a cigarette from Brittany Murphy's boyfriend. Just the way they're kind of flirting with one another, it just has that Graduate feel, and it's really disturbing. It's interesting to watch, but it's very icky.
Yeah, well, it's kind of intentional, isn't it? They're all even when the second victim, the girl who's at home alone and she gets killed, when her parents come back, a bit like with the parents come back and find Drew Barrymore's body, but in this they come back and they're falling out their car drunk, aren't they?
Yeah.
Everyone's got this kind of secret. All the adults have got this kind of hidden secret or agenda or whatever.
Yeah, and in that scene, I couldn't help but wondering. I assume one of them was driving as well, and they're both plastered.
They are. It's like they come up to the front door of the house with the door's been left open after the killers broke into the house. And they typically, they have to walk through the door before they realize, why is the door open? They're that drunk.
Yeah, that murder scene reminded me of the Friday the 13th game, because the way you can slam a victim's head in the door in the Friday the 13th game. You were saying, Justin, about it being covered in Fangoria. I was looking through the old Fangorias from 2000, and they were really bigging up this film, saying it was really, really good, and how its treatment was deplorable, and it was much better than the same year's Urban Legends Final Cut, which I think I disagree with. I think I prefer the Urban Legends sequel myself. But yeah, Fangoria were really behind this film at the time.
Yeah, though they were. I mean, I just as... I'm not sure if there's any of the kind of uncut death scenes were ever shown in there, but just an example of the difference when they kind of reshot it for that murder we were just speaking about. And I was just looking at they're saying that it was a character of Annette, Clementine Ford, and originally it said that this death scene had her throat being slowly pushed onto a plane of glass, so a little bit like the death scene in Inferno, Dario Argento's Inferno. And so that was completely replaced by the death scene by the front door. So so that was kind of interesting in itself. I mean, we'll get into the background. It's quite interesting about. Unfortunately, it's a case of a film that perhaps was in the wrong place at the wrong time, quite literally. But before we do that, I mean, we talk about. I mean, obviously, we do always spoil the movies in so much. Not to say spoil, but we do kind of discuss quite a lot of the different. Usually the killer. And in this, were you surprised? I mean, you said, Joseph, weren't you, that you thought the killer had a neon sign above their head. I mean, given the fact that this peripheral character was kind of just happened to be in every other scene.
Yeah, you basically have Jay Moore, who is the killer. Spoiler alert. He's a well-known actor. He has no business with a plot whatsoever other than to offer friendly advice to the main girl. So obviously he's going to be the killer. But one of the takeaways I took from it is they want you to think that the killer is this Laura Lee Sherman, who's was involved in this incident so many years ago. And I just didn't find that the killer looked anything like a woman. Jay Moore, when he's cross-dressing, he looks like Peter Steele from Typo Negative. He's real tall and almost lean or muscular. He didn't look like a frail girl that was supposed to be doing all the killing. So it's obviously a man the whole time.
I'll interject there because I thought exactly the same as you, Joseph, that particularly in the school sequence, I thought, God, that's obviously a man. Now I could kind of remember who the killer was, but then I listened to the director's commentary. Jeffrey Wright did a commentary on the Blu-ray, and he says, "Oh, we got a woman to double for the killer all the way through just to throw the people off." And I was like, "Really?"
I don't think so. I didn't see that. I didn't buy it.
I didn't buy it either. If it is a woman, it's a very manly woman.
It was a very tall woman as well.
Yeah.
At the beginning, when he kind of has the teen girl up against a tree, the killer kind of towers
particularly
over.
In the scene where he's chasing Britney Spears, that's not right. Brittany Murphy in the hallways of the school, I was like, that's obviously a man. But then on the commentary, that's the scene he points out, saying that's actually a woman playing the killer in this scene. And I'm like, wow.
I like the look of the killer. I think it was very creepy. That lone streak of gray hair. I think that's an interesting get-up for a killer.
And that killer can run in heels, too.
Yeah.
Just like Miss Vanjie.
Yes, it didn't do a death drop. But I can remember at the time, it was. I remember seeing it, and it felt almost like it had been inspired by those kind of the Japanese, the Ring and the Grudge kind of movies, that the killers look with the long black hair of the face. Although it did kind of stretch credulity to breaking point with the fact that Brittany Murphy did a sketch to the police when she survives that attack, and they do a police sketch of the killer, and she describes the nose is a bit smaller or a bit bigger or whatever, and literally if she could actually describe the face, surely she would have recognized her own teacher under that black wig.
Maybe he had makeup on. Well, he had makeup. He did have makeup on, yeah. So
yeah. Well, he had those transformable cheekbones when you apply makeup to it. He was very lucky that way.
Yeah, you wouldn't recognize Silky Nutmeg Ganache if she was walking down the street, would you?
Well, you would, I think. But I mean, that also opens up because I watched a like a mini review of this film on YouTube, and I can't remember who did it, but it was talking about problematic horror movies, and this was one of them. And funny enough, actually, they weren't talking about the kind of gender thing of like the killer being in drag. And do we even realize why was the killer in drag? I mean, obviously, again, so spoiling it, is that he is the son of the woman who was raped, including by Michael Bihn's character, and she then mistreated him. But did they really explain why he then dressed up as her?
I think it's a very base reaction, is that if you're mistreated, if you're fucked up, basically, it'll make you want to dress as a woman, which is a very antiquated way of thinking about these things. It's
it feels a lot like Dress to Kill. That trauma leads to cross-dressing sort of shtick going on. It's very, very outdated way of thinking about, that a person who, cross-dresses, essentially. I don't have the words for this. I'm not hip on all the lingo, unfortunately, but I hope you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, it felt like whether or not, because apparently this film came out 40 years to the day in the UK as to the release of Psycho in the UK, which is something that was picked up by critics when it came out in the UK, at least, because obviously that was the only place it got kind of cinema reviews. And obviously Anthony Perkins and Norman Bates dressed as his mother. So whether or not that was direct nod to Psycho, which I kind of guess it probably was. But it just didn't, I don't know, it felt it's a way of throwing the audience off and thinking it was a woman doing the killing. And it really was the student who had disappeared or had been raped back in the 80s or whenever it was meant to be. but yeah, it's one element that doesn't really work today. But as far as the killer's out, long black hair, that kind of Japanese ghost girl look, I don't know if they were going for that necessarily, is quite arresting as a kind of as a killer's disguise.
I had a couple of takeaway scenes from this film that I wanted to talk about. Well, first, I love the character. It's a very minor character, but the character of Cindy, which she's the girl that's outside, basically explaining what you should do during sex to all the girls on the courtyard. You remember? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah,
I do, yeah.
I love that scene where they're just asking her these general questions about sex. She's like, "No, don't do that. Do this." I love that scene. I love that character. I thought they should have expanded her a little more. She's that perfect kind of slasher movie bitch. And I love the scene where they're having like a town meeting at the school gymnasium, and it really reminded me of like a scene from The Simpsons, because like this brawl breaks out at the slightest provocation between two characters, and suddenly everybody in the entire auditorium is like in headlocks and punching one another. I just kept expecting to hear like Moses like scream, "Hey, what the hell are you doing with my money in your house, Fred?" It just felt like The Simpsons to me. It was very hilarious.
It did. It all kicks off because somebody says, the sheriff says virgins are the target of the killer, and somebody says, "Oh, well, your daughter Tom won't have a problem then," or something like that.
Yeah. And then suddenly the entire school is like just fist fighting. It's hilarious.
Well, I can guess it again. It goes back to that fact of all the parents being sort of dysfunctional. I think it's interesting that as far as the characters, that scene, I think when that teenage girl's telling all the other teenage girls about what to do with sex, is that portrays all of the teenage girls in a more positive light, arguably, than the teenage boys, who just seem to be very immature and a bit bumbling. It does that weird about face, doesn't it, with Brittany Murphy's character's on-off boyfriend who's kind of trying to pressure into sex. And then there's that kind of weird scene, isn't there, where she gets him to suck her toes, and then get them to bite them. Then it all goes horribly wrong. Like she wants to have sex and then she doesn't, which is obviously her prerogative. But he goes from being this kind of creepy kind of guy and this kind of sex pest to being her savior, or certainly a sympathetic character towards the end of the movie, which is kind of a weird volte-face kind of character arc.
He kind of feels like he becomes like her lap dog. I mean, she's treating him like a lap dog. And so he kind of cowers to her character change. I think she gets to the point where she's fed up with all the lies and, being this mouse he put upon girl at the center of all this shitstorm. So she decides to flip the script, as it were, and she kind of emboldens herself. And then she takes her frustrations out on the first person that comes along, which happens to be her douchebag ex-boyfriend who just keeps pressuring her for sex, so she decides to turn the tables on him. It's a very interesting scene, written, but as it's played out, it's very hard to watch, because I'm sitting there watching these two characters, suck each other's toes, or, he's sucking her toes, and I'm thinking, my God, they really look like 14-year-old kids, and I'm like, I need a shower after this. Ugh.
It's compared to other movies, it's certainly, given the director's most famous movie, Romper Stomper, was a pretty no holds bar look at kind of right wing extremism, and it's a very, very violent movie. It's kind of, I remember at the time people were thinking, couldn't really understand why he was making Cherry Falls, because it was just seen as another teen slasher movie. But it is run through with some quite dark elements and quite sort of challenging elements, but it still kind of works as a teen slasher, which kind of, to my mind, means it works as a movie. If it can work in both ways, then that it means it is successful in what it's setting out to do.
Yeah, I'd say overall, for me, it's a very schizophrenic film, but it's a schizophrenic film that works very well despite its abnormalities, as it were.
So is anything else we want to say before we get into some background?
I think I've said all I need to say.
Well, shall we go, let's do some background then. So who'd like to go first?
Well, I have quite a bit here, but Nathan, what kind of background do you have? Do you have any background, Nathan?
Oh, well, no, I got something. The character that you're talking about, Joseph, Cindy, she starred as the final girl in The Pool.
That's right. That's who that is. Yeah, I thought I recognized her. The also the other guy, the real smarmy, smart alecky guy, I think his real name is Michael Weston. He was the star of Witchcraft, which is another post-Scream slasher film. So there's some connections for you. But I mean, I can read through some of this, and if you guys want to pick up what I missed, I'm sure you got some.
Yeah,
I just got the base kind of general stuff. It was at the time and still remains the most expensive quote unquote made for TV film. It had a budget of $14 million, and like I said in quotations because the original intent was for Cherry Falls to be released theatrically in all international territories across the world. It had a tentative theatrical release scheduled for November of 2000, but the film, like we said, was beset with censorship woes in the United States, and the distributor's relationship with USA Films basically led the company to make the decision to release it as a television movie instead. It was syndicated on the USA Network. It aired on their channel on October 20th of 2000. I actually watched that premiere at the time. Like Justin said, the film did have successful theatrical runs in the United Kingdom and throughout Europe. It opened in the United Kingdom on August 25th of 2000. So you got it before we did, Justin. Scream Factory released the film to Blu-ray in 2016, and initially they had tried to procure the uncut version but could not get any help whatsoever from the USA Network. And the director, Jeffrey Wright, he wanted to help as well, but he didn't have any of the uncut elements at his disposal. Some of the scenes allegedly cut from the film included, like you said, a more graphic orgy climax, as it were. The death of Annette, as Justin said, originally scripted, showed her having her throat slowly pushed onto a pane of glass. That scene was filmed and very brutal, but is done in all one graphic cut. Cut. Like you said, it was replaced with that her head getting split open in the door frame, and they even trimmed that scene heavily. Michael Bain initially wasn't interested in the movie because after reading 15 pages of the script, he thought it was just another slasher movie. Oh, Michael, don't say it like that. His agent, however, convinced him to keep reading. Bain liked the satirical approach to the genre and decided to do the movie. The film's German title is Sex oder Stirb, which translates to Sex or Die. In Mexico, it was released as Corre no Grites, which translates to Run, Don't Scream. This is director Jeffrey Wright's only non-Australian film as of this episode, I think. It was the teen orgy that ended up causing the most problems with the MPAA. Ken Selden wrote the scene to feature a sea of white sheets. In his script, the viewers wouldn't actually see most of the orgy taking place. Instead, they would see the shapes of bodies moving under the sheets. When the killer's chasing Jody through the house, that's Brittany Murphy again, the audience would simply see the sheets with splashes of blood randomly appearing on them. Director Jeffrey Wright chose to go a more graphic route and show everything in plain sight, resulting in the film being given an NC-17 rating multiple times. And since he was obligated to kind of deliver an R-rated film, nearly all the nudity, mostly topless females, was cut from the scene. Just general background like that. That's pretty much all I have. So if you guys want to fight out over anything remaining, have at it.
Well, I'd like to bash Erik, but do you want to go first?
Okay. You are such a gentleman. The number plate on the car, and I think it's the opening sequence, I think it says something like Soup Nova, and this is in reference to Jeffrey Wright's ill-fated stint on the film Supernova, which is an even more troubled production than Cherry Falls. Supernova happens to be a favourite film of mine. Well, not a favourite film of mine, but a film I like very much. You can tell it's plagued with production problems, but he was attached to be the director and then left 2 months before principal photography started because he fell out with everyone else, and it was just creative differences. He had to leave the project. So he just put in a little number plate there as a little nod to that film. It was shot over the space of 7 weeks, a 30-day shoot in total, which was quite rushed for a film of that budget, I think. And Jeffrey Wright on his commentary is quite candid about having confrontations on the set, particularly with Jay Moore, who says he didn't get on with him at all. But he doesn't blame him. He blames himself really for it, which is quite honest of him. He also says he got a slap across the face at one stage from Candy Clark, who didn't appreciate being spoken to in a rather brusque manner by him on set. So yeah, it wasn't a friendly environment on set, it seems.
Hey, don't mess with Candy Clark, Jeffrey.
Yes.
That's a no-no.
Yeah, they encountered a lot of opposition to their film from locals. They were filming at a high school, Thomas Jefferson High School in Richmond, Virginia, where they're filming some of the interiors for the high school, and local outraged parents were trying to prevent them from filming there because they did not like the concept of the film, saying that it was promoting... Let's see what they said. It's a film that had no heart, no originality, no conscience, and no soul. It's a film that rewards teenage sexual abstinence with murder and features an antagonist who apparently can recognize virgins just by looking at them. And so they picketed outside the high school and tried to make loads of noise so they couldn't film properly, but they weren't successful because apparently by the time they got there with their pickets, the films they needed had already been got in the can. So, haha to them. Amanda Anka, who plays Deputy Mina in the film, is the daughter of singer-songwriter Paul Anka. And she is married to Jason Bateman for the last 30 years. Another celebrity offspring in the film is Clementine Ford, who plays Annette. She's the character that gets the head slammed in the door, yeah? Annette?
Yeah, that's her.
Yeah, she's the daughter of Sybil Shepherd. And let's see, what else do I have? He says that, yeah, another effect that was heavily cut in the version we now see is the axe to the head that the policeman gets towards the end of the film. Apparently that was much gorier in the original cut, and his head is almost split in half. I mean, he keeps chopping at it until it's cut in half. So apparently it was very, very, very gory. And I think that's all I have that you have not said already. Yeah. Justin.
One more thing I was going to mention before you get into yours, Justin, was that this movie had sort of a Scream style opening scene with I guess it's kind of a bigger character actor in Jesse Bradford. He was kind of famous at the time for Hackers, and I know he'd go on to do Swim Fan, which is one of my favorite kind of From Hell films. And I think he's done a few other things, so it's kind of interesting seeing him as one of the opening victims, kind of a bigger name, but it's probably a nod to Scream, I would assume.
Cool. Okay. Well, thank you. I've got a few other bits. Just mention the script was written by someone called Ken Selden, and he said he said the way that promiscuous inverted commas girls always had sex and die first thing, he thought was very right wing, so he wanted to subvert that, and that was the kind of the basis for the script. When it was covered in Fangoria, they said it read like a twisted version of Peyton Place, which it probably doesn't mean, I mean, people may have heard of that, but it was a kind of a film that I think it was a soap opera and a film with Lana Turner many years ago, which kind of essentially is what I mentioned before. It's like the perfect Americana, but underneath is kind of dark and twisted below the surface. And this film got some comparisons to Twin Peaks at the time as well, that same kind of feel to it. I think the film had been kind of relatively long gestation because Melbourne's The Age said in November 1988 that Jeffrey Wright was due to direct Cherry Falls for Rogue Pictures.
1988 or 1998?
1998. Sorry, I said 1988. But it was actually due a June cinema release in the United States, and then pushed back to a November one, and then of course it came out in October of 2000. And it was, I think, the USA Network. I think it was a sister company for the of the cinematic wing of that kind of whole corporation, who actually made the movie. It was interesting that one of the reasons why I think we alluded to it before was it was kind of a bit of it was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The Chicago Tribune noted at the time that there were a number of movies not being theatrically distributed because of increasing costs, and those included big stars, Michelle Pfeiffer, Woody Allen, lots of films that weren't put out to the cinema because it must have been something at the time where there was it was difficult to make money unless it was like with sort of noted properties or sequels, I can guess. The article said that the film had sat on the shelf, which I think it had for about a year before it was released. And apparently there was discussions, or there was people said that there were some other reasons why, and one of them was due to its quality, which I don't is very fair because the film isn't bad quality at all. But more intriguingly, there's talk that perhaps the film was delayed from the June release because of the Columbine school shooting in 1999, which had caused a ricochet through sort of public consciousness and popular media that year and the year after. And apparently at the time, Congress was debating the effect of movies and video games on teenagers and young people. And there was some talk that the production company that made the film, it was their first film, and they were worried that they may be targeted by the press and Congress, and that was part of the reason why it didn't get a cinema release. So Variety gave the film a so-so review and said that actually the cuts made the film seem choppy and defanged, as they put it. They actually noted, they said that there were cuts demanded by both the MPAA and the BBFC, the British censors. It was my understanding the film wasn't cut by the BBFC, and in fact, when it came out in the UK, in the cut that we all, with the only one we've ever seen, it was actually released theatrically in the UK as a 15 rather than an 18. So, and that actually led to some kind of barbs in the British press when the film came out. The Evening Standard actually said it could be, rather cynically, they said it could start a new franchise. But they bemoaned the fact the BBFC let the film be passed with a 15 certificate, and said that criticised the censors, British censors, are saying that just because it was for kids, in inverted commas, they let it go, and predicted that politicians would go mad if they realised how much more blood and guts was seeping onto the big and small screen. 10 years or so after sort of 20 years, 15 years after 20 years after the video nasty Hysteria. Philip French in The Guardian, as I mentioned, he only really got reviews in the UK because obviously it came out certainly in the English language. He was the one who noted the 40th anniversary of Psycho. He gave it a bad review, said it's an unpleasant creature that comes knife to hand and tongue-in-cheek, a version of those slasher flicks usually starring Jamie Lee Curtis. And the last thing was the Independent newspaper gave it a 3-star review and said, daft as it is, it has a subversive edge. So, and the last thing I mentioned, some of the video reviews when it came out in the United States, it came out, it was dumped a video on a double bill, wasn't it, with a film called Terror Tract, which I've never seen. It said Detroit Free Press, last thing I'll say, said it was about Cherry Falls, so that it was a better spoof of Scream films and Scary Movie, and bemoaned the fact that Urban Legends Final Cut, which of course came out in 2000, got a cinema release when this was much better, and this is in his thoughts, and said it was a shame that it was dumped to DVD on a double bill with Terror Tract. So, it's a film that's going to be long overlooked. So it's good it's out on Blu-ray, but it's probably a shame. I can guess from what you said, Joseph, from what I take away of that is that the USA Network would actually have access to the uncut elements, but they're just not playing ball.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know for sure. It would seem like, I mean, I'm sure they have all the elements, but whether or not they have any surviving uncut footage, I don't know.
Well, the Jeffrey Wright says on his commentary track that he's 100% believes that the uncut footage is out there. It's just that reading between the lines, they couldn't be bothered looking for it.
Presumably, Scream Factory must have licensed it from that company. So it's a shame that they couldn't be bothered. I mean, for a long time, Paramount, it was the same thing with Paramount and the Friday 13th movies, wasn't it? That people were saying if they just let us get into the archives, we'll find the footage. And it was just that Paramount couldn't be bothered. So it's never say never. I mean, I'm sure maybe one day it will make an appearance. But So, what was the kind of consensus on the Facebook group, Joseph?
Well, from 31 comments, opinion for Cherry Falls seems to be neutral. From Instagram Beauty, The Beast, and The BS, I love that name, by the way, writes, It's really a shame that we'll never see the real film we were meant to see. It may have ended up being one of my favorites. As it is, it's enjoyable, but it feels neutered. And on Facebook, Carl Lito writes, I love the director and was expecting something far more controversial and subversive from him. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Listen to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, and about a billion other podcatchers. If you enjoy the show and are willing and able to provide a financial contribution, please consider popping your Patreon cherry. See what I did there?
Clever. Topical. I like it.
Our email address is thehysteriacontinues@gmail.com.
Excellent. Yeah, please do, and join us over on Patreon. And we're moving our way through the 1990s, our top 3 at the moment. So that's been a lot of fun, the first one. So on to 1991 next time. Before we get on to Joke of the Week, which I'm sure will be worth waiting for.
It will.
Just sort of mention, we've been working on a few upcoming film commentaries, and some obviously we can only let you know what they are when we get the go-ahead or when they get the announcement. But one of the ones that has been announced is from our friends at Arrow Video, and is a film that people possibly never thought might see the light of day in high definition. But of course, underestimating Arrow Video, which has kind of unearthed such gems as The Prey and Death Screams, aka House of Death, from 1982 or 1981, is getting a deluxe treatment from Arrow, and along with our commentary. And that was a fun one to do, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, run to the carousel, run.
Wasn't necessarily fun to edit. There's some background information on that would be worthy of its own show, but it was fun to talk about. I've always loved House of Death, or Death Screams as it's being released.
Did you manage to get rid of the sound of Eric's anal beads buzzing in the background?
That was the most difficult part.
Bullies, you big bullies.
It's my joke of the week. It's so freaking fantastic.
How did the press describe the scenario where a Cherry Falls victim was found lying on top of Justin? They said it was They said it was. I'm gonna have to do the setup again because people might have forgotten the setup. How did the press describe the scenario where a Cherry Falls victim was found lying on top of Justin? They said it was Virgin on the Ridiculous. Justin's ridiculous.
Oh
dear!
Wow, it might have been one of the greatest jokes of the week ever.
Thank you very much. You are welcome.
I love the horn, Justin. Thank you.
I'm sure you do, you dirty little trollop. No chance of you getting killed by the killer in Cherry Falls.
Hey, I'm completely innocent.
Well, I'm not married, so obviously I'm completely innocent.
I think I've lost my virginity like 7,000 times.
Oh,
wow! You're the John Holmes of the podcast.
You are the John Holmes, the Ron Jeremy.
Call me the Hedgehog.
Well, you're going to Buster Hyman, weren't you?
Yeah, it's Buster Hyman. Yeah, call me Buster Hyman.
Okay, so anything else we need to talk about before we talk about what we're covering next time?
Well, I got some feedback here. So it says, hey guys, sorry I didn't get the chance to send in some feedback about early frost in time for the show. And this is telling you how long we've had this feedback. We've decided to read one per episode so we're not like boring the audience with like 7,000 things of feedback. So if we haven't read your feedback, we will get to it. But they go on to say, sorry I didn't get any feedback in time about early frost for the show recording, but just want to let you know that I really enjoyed it, even though it was a bit of a head scratcher in places. The department store setting at the start, combined with the grainy VHS footage, gave it a strong, possibly a Michigan vibe, and the whole movie. And why? Oh, I knew that was coming. God, why did I mention possibly in Michigan?
Yeah, you shouldn't have.
He says it gave it a strong, possibly Michigan vibe, and the whole movie kept bringing me back to my days of watching episodes of Prisoner in Cell Block H, to the point where I was fully expecting Vinegar Tits or the Freak Ferguson. I'm not too familiar with this, but I like these names. He kept expecting them to turn up at any point, call someone a silly bitch, then jam their hand into a sheet pressing machine. Plus, Val is certainly in the running for grabbing the most unlikable final girl award from Scout Taylor Compton. I don't know about that.
Yeah, I don't know about that either.
She is rather hard to take. I'll agree with him there. He goes on to say, in regards to the meaning of the title, I can't be sure, but if you listen to the lyrics of the theme song, it seems to be talking about the fact that just as a literal early frost can damage young plants, a metaphorical early frost could do the same to young children. So my interpretation, So my interpretation of the title is that the early childhood trauma suffered by Val's children royally fucked them up and possibly turned them into killers. That's a pretty good interpretation. I probably agree with that.
I buy that, yeah.
Yeah. Also, since Justin brought the issue up on the show, I, for one, am firmly in the camp of being someone who loves to see the more obscure stuff as much as, if not more than, the more mainstream slashers. To me, being a fan of this genre is all about experiencing as many of them as possible, and often the obscure ones are more interesting as they tend to go off in different directions and do weird and unpredictable things.
Well, he's going to love what's coming next.
Oh, yes, he is. The core tropes of a slasher, the killer, the victims being picked off one by one, creative deaths, the final girl, etc., are things which attract us to this genre, but I think it's the elements which aren't as common which make any particular movie enjoyable in its own right, whether it's the eyeball head in Delirium or the samurai ghost in Bloodbeat. So I'm definitely all for giving as much attention to these obscure gems as to the mainstream classics. Finally, just to say it was nice to hear the touching tribute to Tristan Comer. As I've said before, it's not just about your show, but the community which has built up around it. And although I never had any direct interaction with Tristan, I was more aware of him as a fellow fan and regular feedback or Facebook contributor, as well as partaking in many of the movies he posted to his YouTube channel. And on the forums, condolences to his family. Loving you all long time, Simon.Logan.
Well, always good to hear from you, Simon, and I'm glad you enjoyed that episode. And we are trying to kind of guess, measure out the kind of more obscure with the better known sort of titles. I mean, I kind of wish that we had more. When we look at the listenership over them, we get a lot more for a tentpole title. A lot more people tune in than if we cover an obscure thing. But we're not in it for the listens anyway. We're in it for. We enjoy talking about the movies, but we do need to balance it out. So
yeah, you say we enjoy doing the movies, but wait till you hear what Nathan has in store for us.
Yes, well, that's true. But thankfully, there was only ever one Axum, and that wasn't Nathan's fault.
Nathan, I'm crazy.
I love it. That's like one of my favorite lines in the movie.
Which movie? Axum?
So what are we covering next, Nathan?
It's a line from what we're covering next time, which will be Blood Sisters, the Roberta Findlay movie.
About sisters covered in blood.
Well, it's ghostly prostitutes in a brothel, and people are getting picked off one by one. So
their hazing was a not to dismember.
Well, Roberta Findlay is an interesting story just in herself, isn't she?
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to delve into that background there. So I haven't seen the movie since it reviewed it on. I presume it was me who reviewed it on Hysteria Lives, but many moons ago. So given all the comments on the Facebook page, I have some trepidation, but we will go there for you, Nathan.
Thank you.
It'll be fun to talk about anyway, isn't it? Your pick's always fun to talk about.
Justin will always give you his flower, Nathan.
Well, at least we'll survive the Cherry Falls killer.
Unlike me, it's tough being so pure and innocent and good.
I'd be the first to go.
But you're the man who talks about waxes lyrical about digging up a dead film star and doing dirty things to him. I don't think you're that sort of pure, are you?
You're being mean now.
Well, let's move on. What are we playing out with, Joseph?
Well, we're playing out with Sex by Shotgun Messiah, and as the lyrics tell us, sex will be your savior, baby, who you gonna trust.
Ooh.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you for listening to The Hysteria Continues, and catch us next time. We're off to the Bordello of Blood with Nathan.
Yes.
So we'll say goodbye to the good people.
Bye.
Goodbye. I like it when cherry falls into my mouth because they're delicious.
Hyman. Buster Hyman.
Hey everybody, this is Ricky Morgan from Short Bus Cinema, and I had the privilege of putting together that show with Johnny Krug, and I just wanted to say a few things about my podcasting brother. And man, it all started back when I started another show called the Helming Power Hour, and me and my co-host on it, my best friend Danny Bennett, we were listening to other podcasts to see what works, what doesn't work, and we stumbled upon Kruger Nation, and it was Johnny doing his solo show, and it really made us go, this is the way to do it. It cut out all the nonsense. It got down to business. It was hilarious, quickly edited, moved quickly. Just everything about it was just exactly what we were looking for. So we really started listening to a lot of his shows, and we found out that he was going to be at Texas Frightmare one year, and we had just got our show off the ground. So to get to meet him and say, hey man, a lot of our ideas came from listening to your show, and it really made an impact on what we were trying to do. And so we got to meet him and just hit it off, and became friends really quickly, and a lot of the same sense of humor, obviously the same love for movies, and it was just, the chemistry was just there. So not long after that, he called me up and said, hey man, you want to do a project? We got him to come on Helming a couple of times, and absolutely hilarious. You know, if you check out those episodes, we had him cracking up, he was cracking us up, and it was just working. So he called me up and said, hey, how about us do something? So we started kicking around the idea, and I loved that he was thinking beyond, you know, the horror genre in general. I mean, obviously we both love the horror movies, but the show that we put together was just looking for the worst movies ever made. Not a totally original idea, but I think the way that we approached it was really different. And it's all his credit, man. It just really, really worked, and had an absolute blast working with him. And it just breaks my heart, you know, to lose my partner on that. And, you know, I just hope that people will realize the impact that he had on the podcasting community, especially in the horror genre, for sure. And he's definitely going to be missed. He was a trailblazer. All those things that you can say about the great ones. Always fun to be around. And that's what I'm going to miss the most, is when we weren't recording, just talking back and forth, and you know, the great camaraderie we had there. So I can't say enough about him. Definitely gonna miss him. If you haven't checked out the other stuff that he did, I know he's been on this show quite a bit, but check out Kruger Nation and Short Bus Cinema for sure. And you see his name everywhere. He was on everybody's shows. Everybody always wanted him to guest on shows. So check out any of that stuff, and you can just see what he brings every time that he shows up, and you hit the record button. So gonna miss you, my brother. Keep it rocking up there.
Over the past 10 years, we've had several guest hosts on the show, but in my mind, none have stood out quite like Johnny Krug. He was our first guest host, first appearing on episode 60, Predator, and he would go on to make several appearances throughout the show. Truly a wonderful human being, funny to a fault, and me personally, a best friend. Johnny, we're all going to miss you at the Hysteria Continues. We love you like a brother. Rest in peace, my friend.
Let's do it.